The mop handle hit the floor at 7:43 in the morning, and nobody in the Hargrove Financial Building looked up from their screens. That was the thing about Denny Purcell. He had spent 4 years making himself invisible. He arrived before the cleaning crew clocked in and stayed after the last analyst locked their office. He never ate in the break room. He kept his head angled toward whatever surface he was working on, a posture so practiced and specific that it had become, over time, his whole body's resting shape. The gray uniform fit him loose. The name patch above his left pocket read Dennis in stitched black thread, though nobody had ever called him that. The few employees who registered his existence at all called him the Janitor, as though that were a name. He was 61 years old. He had arms like bridge cable wrapped in tattoo ink so dense and dark that the individual images had long since merged into one continuous shadow from knuckle to shoulder. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and pale, that he had carried for 37 years. His beard was iron gray and kept short, and his eyes, a flat and steady gray-green, had the particular quality of eyes that had learned to see threat before it materialized. Those eyes spent the workday fixed on floors, on baseboards, on the interior of trash cans. They cataloged everything anyway. His name was not just Dennis Purcell. That was what the HR file said, what his discharge papers said, what the lease on his apartment over on Garner Street said, what 4 years of quiet custodial work at Hargrove Financial had trained everyone in that building to see, if they saw him at all. He had not been Dennis Purcell for the 23 years before the one when he walked into the Hargrove lobby, with a mop and a work history scrubbed clean of the years that mattered. Nobody in that building knew what he had been, and Denny had spent 4 years making certain of it. He picked the mop handle up from the tile without any visible change in expression, righted it, and continued down the third-floor corridor. Conference Room C was already occupied, the glass wall showing 6 men in pressed shirts around a long table. He could see the man at the head of the table from the corridor, Preston Hargrove III, 38 years old. Third-generation wealth with first-generation contempt. His father had built Hargrove Financial into a legitimate mid-market asset management firm over 30 years of careful work. Preston had inherited it 2 years ago when the elder Hargrove had his first stroke, and in 24 months had hollowed the careful out and left only the contempt. Denny had watched the change the way he watched everything, from a position nobody thought to look at. He did not slow down. He moved past Conference Room C, past the row of junior analysts who kept their headphones on at all hours as protection against exactly the kind of casual cruelty that Preston Hargrove specialized in, and he turned the corner toward the service closet. He had a rhythm to his mornings. The rhythm was what kept him steady. He was in the closet changing out the mop water when Preston's voice carried around the corner, raised and flattened in the particular register of a man who had never needed to care about the volume he used. "Martinez, get him in here." Martinez was Harold Martinez, the facilities manager, a slight man of 52 with a careful comb-over and an ulcer he had been managing with antacids for 3 years. Denny liked Harold. Harold left a coffee on the counter outside the supply closet every Monday morning, always in the same chipped blue mug that said, "World's okayest boss," and he never said anything about it, and neither did Denny. It was simply there, every Monday. Denny heard Harold's footsteps, quick and apologetic in their rhythm, heading toward Conference Room C. He heard the glass door open. He heard Preston's voice drop to the register it used when it wanted to feel private while being overheard, which was a register Denny had cataloged in the first week. He finished changing the mop water. He listened with the part of himself he had never fully switched off. I need you to let Purcell go, Preston said. Today. Harold's response was too low and too careful for Denny to catch all of it. He caught the word budget. He caught the phrase performance record. The phrasing slightly defensive. The way Harold's voice went when he was trying to plant a factual flag against an incoming tide. I don't care about his performance record. Preston's voice, flat, absolute. I care about image. We have Meridian Capital coming through this building in 3 weeks. That man looks like a threat assessment waiting to happen. Get rid of him. Well, the glass door opened again. Harold's footsteps came back around the corner. He stopped at the supply closet doorway and looked at Denny, and the ulcer he had been managing for 3 years was visible in his face right then, plain as anything. Denny set the mop bucket down. He looked at Harold. He waited. Denny, Harold said. His voice was the voice of a man who had not chosen this and could not stop it. I'm going to need you to come down to my office. The envelope Harold gave him contained 2 weeks' severance and a form that said he had been terminated due to departmental restructuring. It was not the truth, and Harold's hands were not entirely steady as he slid it across the desk, but the form said what it said, and that was what the record would show. Denny picked up the envelope. He looked at the form. He folded it once, precisely, and slid it into the chest pocket of his gray uniform shirt. I'll clear my locker, he said. That was all he said. He walked back through the lobby at 8:15 in the morning, carrying a paper bag with a spare uniform, a toothbrush, a St. Christopher medal on a worn chain, and a small frame photograph that had lived on the top shelf of his locker for 4 years. The photograph was of 12 men on motorcycles in a desert somewhere, taken from behind. You could not see their faces. You could see their cuts, the leather vests with the death's head patch on the back, the chapter rocker below it reading San Joaquin in a curve of block letters. You could see that the man on the far left rode slightly apart from the others, the way a chapter president rides. The lobby receptionist, a young woman named Brianna, who had always smiled at Denny when he emptied her trash, watched him walk toward the exit and opened her mouth to say something, and then looked at the bag in his hand and understood. And her face did the thing faces do when they witness an injustice they cannot stop. Denny nodded once at her as he passed. She nodded back. He pushed through the glass door and walked out into the morning. He did not look back at the building. He had a place he went, on the rare days he left work before noon, where he could think without the specific pressure of other people's noise. It was a diner on Oleander Avenue called Patty's, the kind of place that had not changed its laminate menu or its coffee cup pattern in 20 years. The woman who ran it, Patty Osei herself, was in her late 60s, a broad-shouldered woman with reading glasses perpetually pushed up into her silver-streaked hair and an absolute radar for when someone needed to be left alone. She brought Denny coffee without being asked and left without a word, and he sat in the last booth by the window and drank it and looked at the morning light on the parking lot of asphalt. He turned the problem over in his mind the way he turned every problem, slowly, from every angle, without urgency. 2 weeks' severance was 2 weeks' rent, approximately, slightly more, if he stretched it. He had savings, not large savings, the kind of savings a man accumulates when he lives carefully and wants little. He had enough to be all right for several months. That was not the problem. The problem, and he was honest enough with himself to name it precisely, was that the job had been doing something for him that the savings could not replicate. 4 years of ordinary days. 4 years of Harold's coffee on Monday morning, and Brianna's uncomplicated smile, and the particular texture of being a person who caused no alarm in anyone. He had built that life with the same care and patience he had once applied to very different things, and Preston Hargrove had ended it in a single sentence because Denny's arms and scar and bearing made a bad impression for a wealth management firm expecting visitors from Meridian Capital. He had been fired, as far as Preston knew, for looking dangerous. The irony sat on the table beside the coffee cup, flat and unamused. He was on his second cup when his phone buzzed. The number on the screen was not saved under any name. He had memorized it 17 years ago and never needed to look it up. He picked up the phone and looked at the number for 4 seconds, and something in his chest shifted 1 degree, the way a compass needle shifts when north moves. He let it go to voicemail. He sat for another 20 minutes. The booth was warm. Patty came by and refilled the coffee without asking. Through the window, he watched a sparrow work at a hamburger bun someone had dropped near the dumpster, methodical and undeterred. He picked up the phone and called the number back. It rang twice. "I figured you'd need a minute," the voice said. It was a low voice, the kind that came from a chest you felt before you heard. It belonged to a man named Cord Vesper, whom Denny had known for 31 years, and who was the president of the San Joaquin chapter of the Hells Angels, and who had known about the Hargrove financial job from the day Denny took it, because there were very few things that happened within 3 counties of Cord Vesper's territory that Cord did not eventually come to know. "You saw the envelope," Denny said. "Harold Martinez called his cousin, who runs the parts counter, at Alvarez Motors," Cord said. "Alvarez Motors is 2 blocks from the Magnolia Bar. You know how it travels from there?" Denny pressed his thumb against the lip of his coffee mug. The ceramic had a small chip in it, a half-moon of exposed clay. He had sat in this booth enough times to have the chip memorized. "I'm fine," he said. "I know you are." Cord's voice did not change register. "That's not why I called." Denny waited. "I called because I know you're about to do nothing about this," Cord said. "And I wanted you to know that you don't have to do nothing about this. That's all I'm saying. You know how to reach me." The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds by the time it ended. Denny set the phone on the table and looked at it for a while. Patty came by with a piece of pie he had not ordered, cherry, and set it down and walked away without commentary. He ate the pie. He thought about doing nothing. He was good at doing nothing. He had spent 4 years perfecting the practice of doing nothing, of letting the smaller abrasions pass, of measuring cost against response with the precision he had developed during the years when miscalculation killed people. He was, by his own reckoning, the most patient man he knew. The thing was, Harold Martinez had not fired him. Harold had been given an instruction by a man who held Harold's livelihood and had not hesitated to use it. Harold had an ulcer and a chipped World's Okayest Boss mug, and a habit of leaving coffee out for people who would not have expected it. And Harold had been used as a delivery mechanism for something Harold had no part in choosing. Denny sat with that for a long time. He sat with the fact that Harold had looked at him across that desk with the steady, unhappy gaze of a man who was ashamed but could not show it because showing it would not change anything and would only make the shame more visible. He sat with the fact that Brianna had opened her mouth to say something and found there was nothing available to say. He sat with the image of Preston Hargrove behind that conference room glass, not even looking up from his phone as he issued the instruction, the same way you push a button to close a window. The pie was good. It had a solid crust that held its structure. Patty made everything to hold its structure. He picked up his phone and called Cord back. "Tell me about Meridian Capital," Denny said. There was a pause. Not a long one. The pause of a man who is not surprised but is taking a moment to be precise. "Give me until end of day," Cord said. "I'll have something worth hearing." Cord Vesper had been president of the San Joaquin chapter for 14 years, inheriting the gavel from a man who had held it for 19 before him. He was 55 years old, built like a section of old-growth timber, with a gray beard kept long and a single thick braid of silver hair down the back of his neck. He had a full sleeve on his right arm and a name tattoo on the left side of his neck that read Mary Ann in script, which was the name of his late wife, who had died of a stroke 11 years ago at the age of 43, and whose photograph sat on the corner of his desk at the clubhouse in a frame that was not fancy but was not going to move. He was also, and this was the thing that people who only knew his name in the news did not know, a genuinely careful man. The chapter ran 3 legitimate businesses: a machine shop, a salvage yard, and a part supply outfit that served independent garages in a 4-county radius. The chapter's finances were clean enough to withstand scrutiny. Cord had made that a priority 17 years ago when he had sat in a room with the chapter's lawyer and had a 2-hour conversation about the difference between what they were and what they could afford to be arrested for. He called Denny back at 4:47 in the afternoon. Meridian Capital, Cord said, is structured as a private equity vehicle out of Henderson, Nevada. They have a Nevada registration and a public face. Behind the public face, there's a holding company with 3 beneficial owners. And one of those owners is a city councilman named Roger Whitfield, who has a stake in 3 development properties along the Riverside corridor that stand to appreciate significantly if a particular zoning variance gets approved. Denny had a notepad open on his kitchen table, a yellow legal pad he had bought at a drugstore on the way home, and he was writing in the careful block print he had always used. Hargrove Financial manages the investment accounts of 4 separate city council members, Cord continued. 2 of them are on the zoning subcommittee that votes on the Riverside variance in 43 days. Denny's pen stopped. That's not incidental, he said. No, Cord said. It is not incidental. Meridian is coming to Hargrove in 3 weeks to discuss an exclusive management arrangement for a fund with $140 million in assets under a new structure. The fund benefits from the zoning approval. The council members' accounts are managed by Hargrove, which gives Preston Hargrove access to their financial priorities and the leverage to know exactly what they need to hear. Cord paused. Our friend who runs the parts counter at Alvarez Motors has a brother-in-law in the city permits office. Small city, close quarters. Who else knows about the variance connection? Denny asked. The 3 people I just described, Cord said. And now you. And 2 of my men who did the digging. The notepad had 6 lines on it. Denny looked at the 6 lines and understood what they represented, and the understanding settled in his chest with the particular weight of something real and specific that had arrived to replace the abstract wrongness he had been carrying since 8:15 that morning. Preston Hargrove had looked at Denny Purcell and seen a liability. A scarred, tattooed former janitor who made the wrong impression for a clean business meeting with people who were helping to architect a quiet corruption of a zoning process that would funnel money toward men who were supposed to be voting in the public interest. That was what Denny had been fired to protect. I need 2 things, Denny said. I need the documentation on the beneficial ownership structure, and I need to know if there's a city ethics board. There is, Cord said, and I know someone who sits on it. The next 2 weeks moved in a rhythm that Denny controlled from his kitchen table and from Patty's last booth, and from a pay-as-you-go phone that Cord's man Rourke had brought by in a paper bag, along with a thumb drive and 4 printed pages of corporate registration documents that had been pulled from the Nevada Secretary of State database, which was public, and from a property records search, which was also public, and from a campaign finance disclosure, filed with the city, which was extremely public and which had apparently never been cross-referenced with Hargrove Financial's client list by anyone whose job it was to do such cross-referencing, likely because no one with that job had thought to look. Rourke was 29, the youngest full member of the San Joaquin chapter, and he had a setup in the back room of the machine shop that could have belonged to a cybersecurity firm. Cord had identified his skills 8 years ago when Rourke was 21, and had used them exclusively for things that could not be definitively traced and that Cord's lawyer had reviewed and approved in the broad outline. Rourke had the kind of face that processed information the way a machine processes current, without visible effort, and he had the particular quality of very smart young men who had grown up in environments where intelligence without physical presence was a liability, which was to say he had learned early to be very careful and very patient. He and Denny sat at Denny's kitchen table for 6 hours one Tuesday and did not talk much, but covered a substantial amount of ground. The beneficial ownership structure was clean enough on the surface and compromised enough underneath. The councilman's stake in the Riverside properties was structured through a holding company in his wife's maiden name, which was legal but was specifically designed to avoid easy cross-reference with his public disclosure filings. It was not illegal by itself. It was precisely the kind of thing that was designed to be legal by itself while being corrosive in context. And context was what Denny and Rourke assembled across that table with the careful precision of two men who had both learned, in very different schools, that the difference between preparation and improvisation was the difference between walking out and not. On the Thursday of the second week, Harold Martinez received a phone call from a number he did not recognize, and the voice on the other end said, "Harold, it's Denny Purcell. I'm not going to take up much of your time. I need 15 minutes with you. Not at the office. Patty's on Oleander tomorrow morning, 7:30. Bring the mug if you want." There was a silence. "I'll be there," Harold said. He did not bring the mug, which was fine. He brought himself, which was what Denny had asked for. He arrived at 7:28, which told Denny that he had not slept easily in the 2 weeks since the envelope. He sat across from Denny in the last booth, and Patty put coffee in front of both of them and left without commentary. Denny slid a manila folder across the table. It contained 9 pages. Harold looked at the pages one at a time, carefully, the way a man reads when he understands that what he is reading is going to change the shape of things. He set the 9th page down. He looked at his coffee. "The Meridian meeting is in 6 days, Denny said. Harold's jaw was working slightly, the invisible motion of a man processing something he cannot chew fast enough. "What do you want me to do?" Harold asked. "Nothing dangerous," Denny said. "Nothing that costs you your job. I need you to know what you know, and I need you to be willing to confirm it if someone withstanding asks. That's all." "Who's asking?" "Not me," Denny said. He told Harold about the ethics board contact. He told Harold that the question of what Preston Hargrove knew, and when he knew it, was something that the ethics board had the standing to investigate, and that the investigation could be opened on the basis of publicly available information, assembled in a way nobody had assembled it before, and that once it was opened, the Meridian meeting would become something quite different from what Preston was currently expecting it to be. Harold sat with this for a while. The coffee steamed. Outside, the early morning traffic on Oleander built from nothing toward something. "He'll know it came from inside the building," Harold said. "The filing won't name you," Denny said. "What's in that folder is all public record. It can't have come from anywhere." Another silence. "The other council members," Harold said. "The ones whose accounts are managed by us. Do they know about the variance connection to Whitfield's properties? That, Denny said, is the right question. It was the right question because the answer was no, and the no was what mattered. Two sitting council members had their financial accounts managed by a firm whose newest major client had a direct financial stake in a vote those council members were going to cast in 30 days. They had not been told. They had the right to be told. The ethics board contact, a woman named Vera Chandler, who had sat on the board for 8 years and who had developed, over those 8 years, a very specific and personal contempt for financial arrangements that used the language of legitimate business to do the work of corruption, had looked at the folder's contents for 40 minutes the previous afternoon and had said, in the level voice of someone who has stopped being surprised by things while remaining capable of being offended by them, I can open a preliminary review on this within 24 hours of a formal filing. Then let me ask you something, Denny had said to Vera Chandler, across a table in a coffee shop on the other side of town, the folder between them and Rourke sitting quietly 2 tables away, reading a newspaper. If the Meridian meeting proceeds and the management arrangement is signed before the review opens, how does that change things? Vera had looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses, the kind of look that has calibrated many rooms over many years. It doesn't change what we can do, she said. It changes what they have to undo. Denny had thought about that for a moment. I'd like it to change what they have to undo, he said. The preliminary review was filed at 9 o'clock on the morning of the Meridian Capital site visit. Preston Hargrove learned about it at 9:47 when his assistant came into his office and set a printed email on his desk, the kind of email that comes from a city ethics board with CC lines that include 2 sitting city council members and their respective staff directors, and a copy to a reporter at the regional business desk of the Stockton Record, who had been covering municipal finance for 11 years and who had received, via a mailed envelope with no return address, a copy of the same 9-page folder that Harold Martinez had read in Patty's last booth the previous week. The Meridian Capital delegation was in the lobby at 10:15. Cord Vesper arrived at 10:22. He came with 7 members of the San Joaquin chapter. 8 motorcycles rolled into the parking structure of the Hargrove Financial Building with the specific, unhurried precision of men who have decided to arrive and have not been asked for a timeline. The engines were American iron, V-twin, the sound of them a low mechanical declaration that had no interest in being unnoticed. They parked in a line across 3 spaces in the visitor section, which was the only section with ceiling height enough to accommodate the riders, and they came off the bikes without particular ceremony and moved toward the lobby entrance as a unit. Cord was in front. He wore his cut over a black shirt, the Death's Head patch on his back above the San Joaquin rocker, the President's patch on his chest in a rectangle of stitched thread that had been through more rooms than Preston Hargrove had ever seen. He was not rushing. He was not performing. He was simply moving through a lobby door that someone held open for him because the alternative did not seem workable, and his 7 men came in behind him and arranged themselves in the lobby with the kind of spatial efficiency that comes from years of operating collectively in environments where positioning is not accidental. The Meridian delegation in the lobby, 3 men in charcoal suits, had the particular stillness of men who have encountered something they did not put on their itinerary. Cord did not look at them. He walked to the reception desk where Brianna was sitting with the expression of someone watching something she had not expected to enjoy and was enjoying anyway. And he said, in the flat gravel of his natural voice, "I'm here to see Preston Hargrove." Brianna called upstairs. The response came back in the shape of Preston Hargrove himself, who appeared at the elevator 23 seconds later, moving with the energy of a man who had been managing a crisis for 45 minutes and had just acquired a new one. He was slightly flushed. His collar was open by one button, in a way that suggested the button had been opened recently. He looked at Cord Vesper standing in his lobby, and his face did what faces do when the category of problem in front of them is not one they have any prior framework for. "I don't know who you are," Preston said, the tone aimed at volume, missing authority. "My name is Cord Vesper," Cord said. "I'm the president of the San Joaquin chapter, and I'm here about Dennis Purcell." The lobby had gone very quiet. The three Meridian men were still. The front desk staff had the focused inattention of people absorbing everything, while appearing to absorb nothing. The security guard by the door had both hands visible and both feet flat on the floor and was demonstrating the particular professional wisdom of knowing when stillness is the job. Preston's eyes moved from Cord to the 7 men arranged behind him, then back to Cord. "Dennis Purcell is a former employee," he said. "He was let go for operational reasons. That's a private personnel matter." Cord did not respond immediately. He had the quality of a man who is comfortable with silence in spaces where other people find it intolerable. "He was let go," Cord said, "because you did not like how he looked. You said as much, out loud, in a room with a glass wall." He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "I know this because the people who work in your building are not invisible, even when you treat them that way." Something moved through Preston's face. It was not quite recognition of an error. It was the precursor to it. The moment before a man understands that a thing he said with total impunity was heard and retained by a world that was not consulted about whether it had permission to hear. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Preston said. "You can ask," Cord said. He did not move. His voice had not risen by a single degree. His men had not moved. There was no threat in the room that was not already present in the simple fact of 8 men who had declined to be asked away, and the specific quality of the man at the front who had, in 31 years of operating in rooms where the stakes were higher than this one, developed the complete stillness of a person who has already decided and is simply waiting for the room to understand it. Preston's phone was in his hand. The Meridian delegation was watching. The ethics board filing was sitting in the inboxes of everyone it had been filed with. The reporter at the Stockton Record had, by this point, approximately 4 hours to deadline. "What do you want?" Preston said. Cord looked at him for a moment with the flat, measuring attention of a man calibrating the distance between what the other person thinks this is and what it actually is. "You're going to reinstate Dennis Purcell," Cord said. "Full pay, full seniority, written apology from HR on company letterhead. You're going to do it before noon today." He let one breath pass. "You're also going to have a conversation with your compliance attorney about the Meridian arrangement, because that conversation is going to happen with or without your participation, and it will go better for you if you participate." Preston's jaw was set. His eyes moved to the Meridian men and held there for a moment, long enough to register what he was costing himself with this audience, long enough for the Meridian men to register that they were being used as the measure. "You have no standing in my building," Preston said, the words precise and cold, a man reaching for the last available posture. "I have 8 bikes in your parking structure," Cord said, with the specific dryness of a man who does not need to add anything to that. One of the Meridian delegates, the oldest of the 3, a heavy-jawed man who had the look of someone who had been in enough rooms to know which way they were going, leaned slightly toward one of his colleagues and said something very quietly. The colleague nodded once. The oldest man's expression had moved past the initial calculation and landed in a place that was significantly cooler. The Meridian delegation excused itself from the lobby at 10:41. They did not reschedule. Cord stood in the lobby for another 11 minutes. He did not check his phone. He did not speak to his men, who did not speak to each other. They stood where they were standing, and the lobby existed around them with the quality of a space that has been claimed by the simple authority of presence. At 10:52, Preston Hargrove came back to the lobby from the elevator with Harold Martinez beside him. And Harold had a sheet of company letterhead in his hand, and the expression of a man who had been given an instruction he did not expect to be given, and the instruction was the one he would have chosen if anyone had asked him. He handed the letterhead to Cord without being asked to, which was not exactly the protocol, but was what happened. Cord read it. He folded it once. He put it in the interior pocket of his cut against his chest. "He's worked here 4 years without a single complaint," Cord said to Preston. "You won't make this mistake again." It was not a question. Preston said nothing. Cord turned toward the lobby door. His men moved with him, the kind of coordinated, unhurried movement that looks like water moving and is actually precision. And Brianna at the front desk watched it happen, with her hands flat on the desk and a face that was trying very hard to maintain professional neutrality and not succeeding completely, and the security guard by the door, whose name was Marcus, and who had worked at Hargrove Financial for 2 years and had liked Denny Purcell in the specific way of two men who occupy spaces that other people prefer not to notice, held the door open without being asked. The 8 bikes came out of the parking structure in sequence, engines at idle, and turned south on Commerce Street, and the sound of them expanded down the block and rounded the corner and was gone. Denny got the call from Harold at 11:15. He was in Patty's booth. He had ordered the pie again, not because he was hungry, but because the day warranted a cherry pie, and because Patty had brought it before he asked, which meant she had already heard, which meant the morning had traveled in the specific way of small cities where certain things move faster than news cycles. "You can come back Monday," Harold said. "I'd like you to come back Monday." "I'll come back Monday," Denny said. "The letter's going in your file," Harold said. "And I'm putting you in for the building supervisor position that opens up in March." Denny held the phone and looked at the cherry pie and at the parking lot beyond the window where a pigeon was working at a dropped French fry with the focused commitment of something that knows exactly what it wants. "Harold," he said. "Yeah. Thank you for coming to Patty's." A pause. Harold's voice, when it came, was quieter. "Thank you for calling," he said. The Ethics Board review took 11 weeks. By the end of it, Roger Whitfield had recused himself from the zoning subcommittee, and his holding company's stake in the Riverside properties had been restructured to satisfy the disclosure requirements he had been avoiding. The 2 council members, whose accounts were managed by Hargrove Financial, had been notified of the conflict and had both withdrawn their assets from the firm before the review concluded. Meridian Capital had retained different management for its fund, a decision rendered before the review ended, in a quiet communication that Preston Hargrove's assistant forwarded to his personal file without comment. Preston Hargrove retained his firm. Though it was smaller than it had been, he retained his title. He did not retain the particular certainty he had operated with for the first 38 years of his life, the certainty that a man in his position could look at any room and determine, at a glance, who mattered and who did not. That certainty had been revised. Cord Vesper's men had done it without raising their voices. Vera Chandler, on the day the Ethics Board review concluded, filed her summary report and then sat in her office for a few minutes looking at the window. She had asked Denny Purcell once, in their second meeting, where the 9-page folder had really come from, who had assembled it and cross-referenced the public records that the relevant authorities had possessed for years without connecting. Denny had looked at her with those flat gray-green eyes and said, "Someone who pays attention." March came gray and cold to the San Joaquin Valley, the almond orchards in white bloom against the overcast sky, the road still carrying the glitter of frost at 6 in the morning when Denny pulled into the Hargrove Financial parking structure on his first day as building supervisor. He drove a truck now, a dark green Ford pickup with a dent in the rear quarter panel that he had driven since before the Hargrove job, since before the 4 years of quiet and the gray uniform and the practiced invisibility. He parked it in the supervisor's designated space and sat for a moment with the engine off. From the breast pocket of his jacket, he took a phone and looked at the screen. One message, received 2 minutes earlier. It was from Cord. It said, "First day. Don't scratch anything." Denny put the phone in his pocket. He got out of the truck. The morning was the specific temperature of early spring in the valley, cold enough to see your breath for another hour, warm enough to know the cold would not last. He stood in the parking structure for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he could smell the residual exhaust and concrete and that faint metallic note of machinery that clung to any structure where engines spent time. A smell that had lived in his nose for 23 years before the gray uniform years, and that he had not stopped registering even when he pretended he had. There was a coffee cup on the ledge outside the supply closet. Blue, chipped at the rim. World's okayest boss in faded print. Harold's office light was on. Denny picked up the coffee cup and held its warmth in both hands and walked through the lobby door. And the freedom of it, the clean and ordinary and completely earned freedom of a man walking into a place where he belonged, settled across his shoulders like something lifted and something given in the same motion, and he carried it with him through the lobby and down the corridor and into the day. If this story landed the way it was meant to, if you felt the weight of a man who knew exactly who he was and chose, for 4 years, to keep it quiet until quiet was no longer the right answer, share it with someone who understands what that kind of patience costs. Stories like this one find the people they were meant for.